In this lecture, we're going to connect the NewsAPI inside of Parabola. If you're new to Parabola, you're about to discover just how powerful it is. But before we dive into Parabola, please create a NewsAPI account at newsapi.org. NewsAPI is an amazing tool for finding articles from a vast pool of sources. It's super easy to work with, and they offer a free plan which you can find on their pricing page. The free plan is perfect for our needs, so what you'll want to do is go ahead and click Get API Key to create your free account, and you'll want to sign up as an individual, as I'm assuming you are. Now, I recommend doing this before starting to work in Parabola. The sign-up process to get the API key is a breeze. As always, like I mentioned, I've linked all the required tools in the Project Resources lecture to make everything super clear. But once you've created your account at NewsAPI and generated your API key, you can switch over to Parabola. We'll return to the NewsAPI later, but you need to create an account before jumping into Parabola just to make everything flow super smoothly. But now that we're in Parabola, I'm already logged into my account, so once you've created a Parabola account and logged in, you'll see something similar to me. And if you don't have an account yet, of course, please create one. It's a free plan that we're using here, so again, you'll be able to access all of the features that I have. And the actual sign-up process for Parabola is very simple and self-explanatory. And of course, as with NewsAPI, I've linked the correct links in the project resources if you are struggling to find the correct website. But once you've created or logged into your Parabola account, you'll see a screen like mine. And from here, we can start building our flow. That's what automations are called in Parabola. So to begin, what we'll want to do is start by clicking New Flow, which you can see in the top right here. Now, once you're in your flow, the first thing that I want to do to begin building our project is just to rename it, as I do with many things that we've created in this course. So we can rename this flow by clicking at the top where it says Untitled, and what I'm going to do is rename this to the following. I'm going to rename it to Stock Sentiment, just like our Airtable database. Now, in the first step of our flow, what we're going to be doing is pulling data from the NewsAPI. So to do this, what you'll want to do is click into this box here, which says Add a Step, and then you'll want to search for Pull From, and then you'll see here API. So once you've found that, you'll want to drag that onto the canvas and snap it into place. Once you've added it onto your canvas, you can open up the settings to begin editing it. Now, feel free to rename the function by clicking the pencil icon at the top. I'm going to leave it as it is for now, which is Pull From API. But renaming functions like this can be really helpful when you're building large flows in Parabola. Now, let's start pulling the data that we want from the NewsAPI in Parabola. So first things first, what we'll want to do is make sure that the request type is set to GET, because we want to get information from the API. The other option is POST, and that's for sending data to an API, which isn't what we want to do here. So once you've defined the request type as GET, we can then move on to the API endpoint URL. The API endpoint URL is absolutely crucial because it's the call Parabola will make to the API to get the specific data that we're after. Now, just to clarify, I didn't memorize the API endpoint URL that I'm going to enter in just a moment. It's all in the NewsAPI documentation. So if you go to the NewsAPI website, along the top, you'll see the link for documentation, and everything is there. And best of all, it's extremely well organized. So if you ever want to make a different query, just check the documentation. Being comfortable with reading documentation is a really valuable skill in general. But back in Parabola, let's begin defining our API endpoint URL and crafting it in the way to call the specific data that we want. And I'm going to explain each part as we go along to make sure that you understand it clearly. So first things first, what I'm going to do is enter the API endpoint URL without any parameters. And the URL that I want to call is newsapi.org/v2/top-headlines. And as mentioned, this is in the documentation, and it's a way for us to get top headlines. The alternative API endpoint URL will be to get every article published. So if we go back to the documentation, you can see that we're in top headlines. We can see the API endpoint URL right here. And if we wanted to get everything, so every article, you can see how that API endpoint URL changes. But let's go back to top headlines and then back to Parabola. We can now start defining the URL parameters, which we can see here. This will help us to refine our API call to get only the specific data that we're interested in, because we don't want the top headlines for anything and everything. So what I'm going to do is click Add, and then in the first URL parameter, I'm going to input Q, which stands for query. So once you've clicked Add, then enter Q in the first box, and in the second box, what you'll want to enter is the query that you want to search for. So for our project, we're looking for articles related to Alphabet, i.e. Google stock. So therefore, what I'm going to enter is the following: GOOG. That's the stock ticker symbol for Alphabet, which you can find on any finance website like Yahoo Finance or Google Finance. Now, one thing to notice here before we continue defining our URL parameters is that you'll notice how the API endpoint URL changes as we define the parameters. So we could add the parameters directly into the URL, but it's easier to understand if we walk through it step by step as we're doing now. Now, of course, we entered GOOG, which is the stock ticker symbol, but queries can be longer or include multiple words, so they can get more complex than this. Again, I recommend checking the documentation to understand how to structure, for example, multi-word queries. It's super simple, but everything is in there. But let's continue building our URL parameter in Parabola. So the next parameter that we'll want to define is the date. Since we're using the free NewsAPI plan, we can only set the date before. Therefore, you should copy everything that I'm doing except for the date. So you'll want to use the day before that you're watching this lecture as the date. So to define this URL parameter, and it will make a lot more sense as we define it, you'll want to click Add again. And once you've done that, you'll first want to enter from, and then you'll want to input the date, and it has to be in the format of year, month, and day. So the date that I'm going to enter is the day before that I'm filming this, and that is 2023, so the year. Then we have the month, 05, so May, and 10, so the 10th of May, 2023. And like I said a moment ago, make sure it's the day before that you're watching this tutorial or that you're building this project. Don't use the exact same from date that I'm using, otherwise the project won't work. Now that we've set that, we can now continue, and now we have to define an end date. And the end date should be the same as the start date because we're using the free plan. So again, we'll want to click Add, and then we'll want to enter 2, and then again, just put in the same date. Let's now continue and set up the other parameters. So for the next parameter, I want to define how the data should be sorted. So let's click Add again, and this time I want to enter sort by, and by should be with a capital B in the first box, and then I want to enter relevancy, so RELE, and then vancy, so relevancy. And that'll sort the articles by their relevance to the query that we've defined, which is the stock ticker symbol for Alphabet, i.e. Google. The alternative to relevancy is popularity, which will sort articles by their popularity relating to the query. With that set, we can click Add Again to define the next parameter. And this time I'm going to enter language. And then I'm going to enter the English language code, which is EN. So all the articles that get returned will be in English. Now we'll move on to the final URL parameter. So click Add one more time. And this time we need to set it to API key. And key should be with a capital K. And this is essential for getting all of the data that we need from NewsAPI. Without this, we won't be able to access the data that it has. So once you've entered API key, you'll then want to switch over to your NewsAPI account and then copy your API key, go back to Parabola and paste it into the API endpoint URL to finish crafting it. Now I know I've mentioned this a few times in the course already, but with any API keys that you use, be mindful about not letting them get exposed. Otherwise, people can use your account limits. And with that pasted in, we've completed our API endpoint URL to get the specific data that we want. So what you can now do is simply close the box for the API endpoint URL. So great job on following along building that out. But there is just one more thing to do. But before doing that, what I want to do is click Show Updated Results. Now, if you've connected to the API correctly, you should get a return that looks something like the one you're seeing now. So the status should be OK, the total results should be displayed, and the articles should be a list of dictionaries with details on each article. Now, in this example, on this specific day, there is only one total result, hence one article. But if you're searching for something else, there might be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, or so on. But in our case, there's only one result. But that doesn't change the way this project functions at all. So rest assured, whether you have more total results, the project will work exactly the same. So with everything working as intended, let's unpack this data into a table format. So to do that, what you'll want to do is on the left-hand side, click Response JSON. And then from there, you'll want to define the top level key as articles. Then click Show Updated Results again. And this time, you'll see that the data expands into a table almost instantly. That means we've successfully made our unique call to the News API using Parabola. From this point on, we'll be working with the data right here in Parabola. But for now, we can click off this function and return to our canvas. And that's it for this lecture. Great job following along. Join me in the next lecture where we'll extract specific data with the help of AI. I can't wait to see you there.